questions and answers and depth, and also what does it have to do if you're Jewish or not Jewish? It's logic, it's intellect. Anybody can understand it. Number 28 is another quote, and that is that we know that when we wake up in the morning, the first thing we say are the brachas, and one of the brachas are what we call birchas HaTorah. We make a bracha on Torah study, which means just like we make a bracha before we do other mitzvahs, we make a bracha before we eat matzah, we make a bracha before we bench the lulav and esrog. A woman makes a bracha before she benches licht, because you make brachas on mitzvahs. So learning Torah is also a mitzvah. And every morning we make a bracha to thank Hashem that He gave us the mitzvah of studying Torah. In fact, in reality, we should be doing it every time during the day that I open up a book of Torah and I'm studying, I should make the bracha. But because we make it in the morning, it already includes everything that's going to happen for the rest of the day. So one of the shocking things we find in Gemara is, when the Gemara is discussing why the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. In reference to the second Beis HaMikdash, why that was destroyed, the Gemara gives a pretty clear answer, and that is, it wasn't a time where Jews were worshiping idols. It wasn't a time where Jews were lacking in Torah study. It wasn't a time where Yidden weren't observing mitzvahs, but the problem was sinas chinam, which means a lot of hate amongst people. And that's why the Gemara brings the famous story with Kamsa bar Kamsa, that this was the last straw that broke the camel's back, and this led to destruction of the temple. It's not just this story. The reason why the last thing that led to destruction of the Beis HaMikdash was a fight that broke out between two people. This was sort of a reflection of what was the main issue in that generation that led to the destruction of the temple. The issue was sinas chinam. People had baseless hate for each other. But in reference to the first Beis HaMikdash, it's not clear. There are different opinions why it was destroyed. One of the opinions is, not because they didn't study Torah, but they didn't make the bracha before learning. We know making a bracha is a very important thing. In fact, I'll demonstrate. Thank you, Hashem, for giving me water. Thank you, Torah, for bringing it. So it's understood that, yes, it's important to make a bracha. It really means a lot. But to say that they learned Torah, they studied a lot of Torah, but because they didn't make a bracha before learning, that's why it was destroyed. That's a reason for the Beis HaMikdash should be destroyed. We should go into Gullus and thousands of people should be killed. How does that make sense? It's not such a severe avera. So the answer to all this is as follows. I mean, this is, to a certain extent, it's one of the cornerstones of Chassidus. And this is one of the big, huge differences between people who study Chassidus and people who don't. Even though in today's day and age, even people don't study Chassidus, they're aware of it through other ways, and the teachings of Chassidus have sort of infiltrated so many other systems of learning, and you find it in many other places. So now it's much more known than before, and still, even now, you can find that people are lacking in this area. And that is that the essence of Torah is not what people think it is, it's wisdom. In other words, on the surface, it looks like wisdom is the greatest thing that a person could ask for. Because if you have wisdom, if you have intelligence, then you'll know what to do, how to lead your life. So of course, intelligence and wisdom is the greatest gift that Hashem can give a person. But there's wisdom in different areas. There's wisdom in medicine, there's wisdom in science, there's wisdom in all sorts of areas, math, and there's wisdom in Torah. It's another field of wisdom. So we'll say, being that this is the Torah that Hashem gave us, Therefore, it's the deepest wisdom, is the most emes wisdom. There's that story told with the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe told the story that he was once, I think he was once on a train, this is before he became Rebbe, and there were people having a heated discussion about all the different isms, which is the right, which is the wrong, communism, or this ism, or that ism. And seeing that the rabbi is sitting there, so someone approached him and said, what's the opinion of Judaism, another ism called Judaism? What does Judaism say? Which ism is the best? So the Frierdiker said like this, every one of these ideologies, they have a certain advantage and they have a certain disadvantage. No matter how bad something looks, it has some sort of an advantage. And that's why there'll be tens of thousands of people that will believe in it because of the advantage. In other words, they don't pay attention to the disadvantage, they go for the advantage. So let's say America is a country where everything is, it's a liberal country and free and we're not harsh, very open, a lot of advantages in that, of course. How could you compare it to a place like a communist country? But on the other hand, there are also disadvantages. There's things that would happen there would never happen in a communist country. And there are advantages in the communist, and disadvantages in of course, there are certain advantages in the communist way, and that's why there are people that go for it. Even though, as a result of that, there's so many disadvantages, and look how many people got killed, and look at all the, they don't look at that, they just look at the advantages. And the same with every ism. So he said the reason for that is, how come every single one of these ideologies has a maila, but it also has a chesron, has flaws. Something is missing, something's wrong. Because they're created by humans, and humans aren't perfect. So therefore, just like we're not perfect, whatever we create is also not going to be perfect. So if a person comes up with an idea, a brilliant idea of how to live, it'll have certain advantages, but at the same time, it'll also have certain disadvantages. And therefore, it can be perfect. The Torah is from Hashem. It's Hashem's chokhmah, Hashem's wisdom, and therefore it has advantages without disadvantages. In fact, every single milah, anything that you find in any wisdom in the world is found in Torah. So Torah is all the milahs without the chesronos, all the advantages without the flaws. That's what Torah is. So we could look at Torah as a wisdom, it's the most brilliant wisdom, the deepest wisdom, the most emes wisdom. It has all the emes without the flaws. And therefore, we respect Torah and we love Torah and we're passionate about Torah. But the truth is that this is just something external. The real milah of Torah is that it's chokhmasa or it's shakalash baruch Hu. This is one of the first things that we get to learn when you study Tanya. There's no doubt that besides the fact that Tanya is the basis for Chassidus, in Tanya itself, the order of things, certain things Alter Rebbe put in the first chapter, the second chapter, the third chapter, the fact that he put them right at the beginning means these are the fundamental principles. Without this, you can't even go any further. So one of the fundamental things are that Torah is Hashem's wisdom, and that's the essence of Torah. And therefore, this is what the Gemara is saying. When you say that somebody who's not Jewish is brilliant, is intelligent, yes, Hashem gave wisdom to the whole world, wisdom. But Torah, which is a chokhmah shel baruch Hu, that's only found in Torah when a Yid studies Torah. And no one else in the world has that. There's no other wisdom in the world that has that. We're not talking about the wisdom part. We're looking at the wisdom like a capsule. In the capsule, there's a powder, and the powder, that's what is the healing, not the capsule. Capsule is just a piece of plastic to contain the powder. So in a sense, the wisdom in Torah, the questions, the answers, the logic, the brilliance that you find there, as brilliant as it is, it's still only a capsule for something deeper. And what is it that's deeper? That's the godliness that's in Torah. I once heard something and which brings out this point, and then I did a little test to see to what extent there is that difference. I'll tell you what I mean. Someone told me he read in a sefer that the author asks a question and raises this question as a contradiction. In one place it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Barasi Yetzer Hara, I created the Yetzer Hara, Ubarasi Lo Torah Tavlin, but I created the Torah, which is a spice to neutralize the Yetzer Hara. Like you have something bitter, and then you put in good spices and it tastes good. So Hashem said, I created the Yetzer Hara, but I created the Torah, and with the Torah, we can have control over the Yetzer Hara. There's another place where it says, if not for the fact that Hashem gives us assistance in our Aveda, we would never be able to manage the Yetzer Hara. It's so strong. So what's the contradiction? Here it says the reason why we can overcome the Yetzer Hara is because we have Torah. And here it says the reason why we can overcome the Yetzer Hara is because of Hashem. So it's a contradiction.
That's not Torah and Hashem is all one.
Oh, so he said Torah and Hashem is all one. And anyone who studies Chassidus knows that. And I remember when I was teaching high school girls who were 14 years old, I asked them the same question. They also looked at me, what are you talking about? Torah and Hashem are one. This author gives a very interesting answer. He says like this: if you're a Torah scholar and you have a lot of Torah, then you don't need Hashem, then you can overcome the Yetzer Hara with Torah. If you're an ignoramus, then you need Hashem's help. Where does a person come to say that? Because obviously in his mind, Torah is one thing and Hashem is another thing. It's not really connected. But these are the words that we have here, number 26. And these words come from the Zohar. If you want to look back in this booklet on page 41, it's a quote from Tanya, but the Tanya is there quoting chapter 23 in Tanya begins with these words and explains it. And the quote is from the Zohar. The Zohar says, Torah and Hashem are absolutely one. In the booklet, it's page 41. Now, you're not going to believe me when I tell you this story, but I'm telling you that it's true. It's really true. What is the story? I was reading a part of I guess it was like not a magazine, but a newsletter of some other place. And they were, in this newsletter, talking about the greatness of their Rosh Hashiva. Of course, I'm not going to mention any names or anything. The greatness of the Rosh Hashiva. One story, another story, another story, another story. One of the stories that I saw there, I was shocked. They write the following story, that generally speaking, he would wear his, when he wore his hat, he would keep his yarmulke in his pocket. When he took off his hat, he would put on the yarmulke. He came to give a shir, all the Bachram are sitting, and he is sitting in front of the classroom, opens up his Gemara, takes off his hat, but he was so he forgot to put on the yarmulke. And he's standing there without a head covering, and he's teaching Gemara. And the Bachram are like, talking and smiling, and he notices, and he says to them, what's going on? What's everybody talking about? So they tried the best they can to say in a respectful way that you forgot to put on your yarmulke. So he said to them, that's when you're listening to a shir in Torah, that's what's in your mind, that's what you're thinking about. In other words, if you would really be heavily and deeply into this shir, you wouldn't be paying attention, wouldn't even notice anything. So they write the story as the greatness of this person, that he was so immersed in his Torah study to the extent that he didn't even realize that it has a yarmulke. But the truth is, if you think of Torah as Hashem's Torah, you would tremble. How could you learn Torah without a yarmulke? The purpose of the yarmulke, a head covering, you're not allowed to walk into the base of English without a head covering, because without a head covering, it's disrespectful to Hashem. When you're learning Torah, you're face to face with Hashem. You're actually embracing Hashem. So again, it comes to the fact that there's a certain passion, a certain excitement, and a certain what should I say, a fire of burning to study Torah because of the logic, the wisdom, the depth, the intellect. Intellectually, it's very stimulating and very exciting. But the truth is that it should always be because there's something higher in Torah, and that's Hashem's presence in the Torah. And that means that when I learn Torah and I absorb words of Torah in my head, in essence, I'm absorbing Hashem himself. And that's what's explained in Tanya, right in the beginning, one of the first chapters of Tanya. So this is the meaning of the story of what the Gemara says. They didn't make the bracha before. Let's take a look at the bracha for 1 second. Here in the booklet, it's on page 40. I know we all say it every morning, but sometimes we say things and not necessarily are we aware of what we're saying. So let's look to see what we're saying. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher bacha banu mikol ha'amim. Hashem chose us from all the nations. V'nasan lanu es Torah, he gave us his Torah. And then we say, Baruch atah Hashem neisen haTorah. These words that we make in the bracha emphasize, number one, that we are excited because nasan lanu es Torah, he gave us his Torah. This is Hashem's wisdom. That's why we're excited, not because it's wisdom, because it's Hashem's wisdom. And then we say the words Neisen HaTorah, which means thank you, Hashem. Who is Hashem? The one that gave us the Torah. Again, emphasizing that point. So actually in the Shulchan Aruch, one of the commentators on Shulchan Aruch writes that's what the Gemara means. They didn't make the bracha before. Not that they didn't make the bracha. It means they forgot about the giver of Torah and they were focused on the Torah itself. In other words, when they studied Torah, they're studying Torah and their passion for Torah was the wisdom, was the intellect, and not the fact that through this we're connecting and embracing the one that gave us the Torah. And that's what led to it. Because what does it say in the first quote? That the Torah could be a drug that gives life, and the Torah could be a drug that does the opposite. Because the Torah is wisdom, and it's brilliance, and it's Hashem is the one who presented us with this wisdom. But because of that, it's something which is very powerful. And as a result of that, if I'm learning Torah for the right reasons, which is to connect to Hashem, then the Torah gives a person life. It makes me more refined. I'm a more sensitive person. I'm a more caring person. I'm a more honest person. And it'll lead me to learn and do more mitzvahs and enhance my relationship with Hashem. If a person learns Torah because it's wisdom, not because it's God's wisdom, and they separate the two things, then chas v'shalom, it gives me a lot of power. It gives me a lot of understanding. It doesn't do anything to refine my Yetzer Hara. And as a result of that, I can end up using the knowledge of Torah to actually undermine what Torah is all about. And unfortunately, in the history of the Jewish nation, there are a number of people that way they're known. I mean, we won't use the word famous, but actually the word more infamous, that they did things which are extremely destructive, not just themselves, but destructive for the whole Jewish people. And yet, who were they? They were great Torah scholars. But even though they're great Torah scholars, they use their knowledge of Torah in a negative way. So one example is the Reform movement, which is the most recent. The Reform movement is a movement that brought hundreds of thousands, and literally by now you can say millions of Jews to assimilate and move totally away from Yiddishkeit. And who was the one that established the Reform movement? It was someone in Germany by the name of Moses Mendelssohn, which, shocking enough, he was a frum Jew, which means he davened every day, put on tefillin every day, he davened 3 times a day, he observed mitzvahs, Shabbos, Yontiv. He introduced an idea that we have to become more involved with the secular world, and we have to have secular knowledge, and we have to become part of the secular world. And he was liberal about a lot of different halachas. Definitely didn't really pay attention to those things that are more spiritual. A little shift here and there. But at the end of the day, and he wrote, by the way, a commentary on Torah, or a book, which is a commentary on Torah. At the end of the day, this led to a movement that literally brought millions of people far away from Yiddishkeit. His own children, I think they say he had 6 or 5, 6 sons, all of them converted to Christianity. But it didn't start with that. It started with an ideology that's still based on Torah, but it was a distortion of the true Torah. But the reason why he was able to do that was because he had Torah knowledge. Another person in history, which is found in Gemara, is when the Gemara talks about, is there anybody that'll never merit to have Tchias HaMesim? So one of the examples that are given is Yerobim ben Nevat. Yerobim ben Nevat was a king. And not only a king, but he was appointed by a Navi, whose name was Achia Shiloini. He appointed him as a king. And he, unfortunately, went as far as forcing Yidden to worship idols. So obviously he was a wicked king, but the reason why his wickedness was so severe is because not only did he do things himself, he forced others to do it. And that's one of the worst things in Torah, when a person commits a sin and also causes other to sin, like there's hardly any return to that because you can't undo the damage you did. It's a domino effect, one person, another person, and you can never go back and if I do something, I can do tshuva and stop doing it. But if I cause tens of thousands of people to do something, the effect is just keeps going and moving and from one person to the next, and it's out of my control. So who was he? The Gemara says not only was a Torah scholar, but based on a certain pasuk, these are the words in Gemara, that all the Torah scholars of the generation compared to him would be like a blade of grass compared to a person. Could you imagine? We're talking about in the generation right after David HaMelech's generation, in the generation of Shlomo HaMelech's son. So that's a time where there were hundreds of Nevi'im and thousands of Torah scholars, great Torah scholars and tzaddikim, and yet the Gemara says altogether, in terms of Torah knowledge, nobody compared to him. And yet, look what he did. So this is the answer when you have Torah, and you're not really using Torah to connect to Hashem, then the Torah ends up making the person, inflating the person's ego and giving the person more sense of self and arrogance. And as a result of that, they end up using Torah, they look into Torah and they find justification for what they want to do in the Torah because it's distorted. And at the end, they end up doing more damage than doing good. So therefore, when it comes to Shavuos, Matan Torah, we're excited about the Torah, we're celebrating the fact that Hashem gave us the Torah. This is the time to emphasize that what we're celebrating is that Hashem gave us himself, but he invested himself in the Torah. So in fact, this is number 32 on the list. Ano Nafshik Savas Yehavis. This is the acronym of the word Anoichi. The first word of Aseret Sadibis is Anoichi. Aleph, Nun, Chav, Yud stands for these 4 words. It's Aramaic, and which means Hashem says, I have written up and invested myself in the Torah. And by the way, this explains, I remember once I was speaking somewhere in a shul, I was giving over a sikh of the Rebbe. What?
Where is he?
Where was it?
Where is he?
Where was I speaking?
Yeah.
It was a very long time ago. I don't remember. In a shul somewhere. In other words, Yontif, we all go to different shuls. Everyone wants everyone to go to what we call a talucha, to go to other neighborhoods and go to other shuls and give over words of Chassidus. So I went to one of these shuls and I brought out one of the points that I brought out in Tanya, chapter 15, that a person who has to sort of go against their nature, that's the most precious to Hashem. Which means if you have two people, one that does a lot of good things, but it's natural for him. There's no avodah involved. He didn't have to really work on himself to get there. And another person that does much less, but they have to go against their nature, that's the most precious to Hashem. This is the famous chapter where the Alter Rebbe says how the Gemara describes a person who reviews his studies 100 times. Everything he learns, he goes over 100 times. Yet, when a person does it 101 times, that's the one that's really precious by Hashem. Why? Because in those days, it was the norm to review everything 100 times. 101 times was going beyond my habit, beyond what I'm used to. That little hairline going beyond, that's the most precious to Hashem. And I ended up saying, so sometimes you can have a person who studies 5 hours a day, and you have another person who studies 5 minutes a day. But the one who's studying 5 minutes a day never learned Torah before, and it's a struggle. Should he actually do this? Is it really important? It's my Yitzhara stopping me, and he works on himself, and he gets himself to learn 5-10 minutes a day. That's why I said, clearly, in some ways, this person's 5 minutes and 10 minutes a day might be more precious to Hashem than the other person's 10 hours a day, because for that person, it's natural. And for this person, he really had to give of himself for Hashem. Yeah?
Sounds like Hashem wants us to struggle.
You're hearing the wrong sounds. It's not Chazal that Hashem wants us to struggle. It is that Hashem wants us to serve Him with avodah. He has malachim, He has angels. The angels have a little thing in the back that you wind up like this. You wind it up, and Hashem says, Ava, these angels love Hashem. Yira, these angels fear Hashem. These are angels that are programmed to be a certain way. And that's the way they are for their whole angelic life. And it's beautiful. But there's no avodah there. They're not doing anything. They're programmed to be a certain way. If Hashem would program us to be good-natured and loving Hashem and loving Torah and loving mitzvahs, and we'd be that way, it would be nice. But for that, He has angels. So He created humans for the purpose of dir b'tachtenim, to transfer darkness into light, which means that naturally we're not that way, and we have to get that way through avodah. So the only time that I know that I'm getting that way through avodah, if there's a struggle. It's not Hashem loves the struggle. Hashem loves when we're doing our own avodah, not something which was given to us naturally. And therefore, when there's a struggle, not to compare exactly, but in English there's a phrase, no pain, no gain.
The angels have it easy and we don't.
Absolutely. Angels surely have it much easier than we do. Yeah, not even a question. But we have a job as humans, and this is what gives Hashem more pleasure than all the angels in the world. That's why Hashem gave the Torah to us. So this person walked over to me, actually was the rabbi in the shul, and he said, I disagree with what you said, because at the end of the day, the person studies 5 hours a day. He can be somewhat of a Torah scholar. The one who studies 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, he's going to remain an ignoramus for the rest of his life. And it's true. Could you imagine having a science teacher that's passionate about science and say, please, students, study a science book 5 minutes a day? It's a waste of time. What are you going to accomplish in 5 minutes a day? What are you going to accomplish if you study math 5 minutes a day? So if Torah would be purely intellectual, he's right. There's no point and no purpose. If Torah is about connecting to Hashem and embracing Hashem, and that's why the halach is that if a person is very bogged down with life and he has no time to learn, he should learn at least one pasuk in the morning, one pasuk at night. What's the point? One pasuk, how much am I going to accomplish? A person live for 120 years learning one pasuk a day, one pasuk at night, he'll still be an ignoramus, even if he's perfectly healthy till the age of 120. And the answer is, I might not have all the knowledge, but I will have, by learning and saying a pasuk of Torah, I'm embracing Hashem. I'm becoming one with Hashem. And it makes a difference if it's a whole chapter, if it's a whole tractate, or it's one pasuk. If we understand that this is the real true advantage of Torah. A few years ago, I had an interesting story. One of my nephews opened up a Gemara in 770, and he found a piece of paper from a Chabad newsletter from 1958. What? And had a story about my grandfather there, so he gave it to me. Wow, interesting, okay. I read a story that I never heard before. The story is, it was a certain Fabranian there, somebody by the name Rabbi Leibov. He was the one who was the head of Tzir Agudas Chabad in Israel. And he tells this story. He says, when I was a young bocher, I was in Samarkand, where the Chabad Chassidim were during the war. And he said that, of course, there were Lubavitchers, and there were a lot of people who were not religious people, Jews, but not religious. So he said that my grandfather told the Bochrim to get as many children as they can, to bring them in and learn, and tell them if they learn, spend time learning by day, then at the end of the day, they're going to get bread and butter. These were the goodies in those days, bread and butter. And they did that. And he said that after a while, they said to him, and by the way, this is way before the Mivtzoyim days. Nothing, we're talking about 1940, 1942, 43. So they asked him, what's the point? Look at these kids. They leave, they go out, they take off their yarmulke, they go out and they eat anything they want. They don't keep Shabbos. Well, we're wasting our time. What's the point of teaching them Chumash and whatever? So he said, it's based on a story that I once heard with Rebbe Rashab. I heard a few versions, but this is the way they write the story there. The Rebbe Rashab was on a train and he was reading something. And there was some older Jewish woman sitting not far, and she's bending over to see what he's reading. So Rebbe Rashab changed places. She went to that place and started looking again. So Rebbe Rashab said to her, what are you looking at? What are you looking for? So she said, I forgot what pasuk it was, but let's assume it says the words on top, Hashem Yimlech Leilam Voyad, that I understood, but the rest over there I couldn't understand. It was a mimer probably. So the pasuk she was able to read and she knew it. So the Rebbe Rashab later said that my whole trip and all the time that he spent traveling and everything involved was worth it that this woman should say this pasuk one time. So he said, on that basis, I feel that these kids, yes, they go home, they do what they want, but they're spending time during the day and they're saying psukim of Chumash. We have no idea how much Hashem gets pleasure from what they're doing. And then he concludes, and why am I telling this story now? Because this past week I was on the bus and somebody sits down next to me and looks at me and says, do you recognize me? I say, no. And he says, I was in Samarkand and I was one of those kids that you guys pulled in to learn Chumash. And now I'm here in Israel. I'm married with a family. We're leading a Torah life. And I want to say thank you. This is the outcome. But I'm bringing out the point, saying that pasuk one time, it was all worth it. What's the big deal? You say a pasuk one time. How much wisdom and how much knowledge could you get from saying a pasuk one time? And what if it's the same pasuk you say every day? You really get no knowledge. Imagine you say Shema Yisrael. The Gemara says you can say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad in the morning. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad at night. Someone who can't study, doesn't know much, and he is observing the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. What kind of mitzvah is that? And the answer is, if you realize that Torah is Hashem, and by learning Torah you're embracing Hashem's essence, then saying words of Torah is bringing Hashem into my life, and I'm connecting to Hashem, and that's why it's so powerful. There was a time that when men studied Torah, they wouldn't sit. They stood only the whole time. How could you sit there in respect for Torah? When did it stop? The Gemara said that at a certain point, people became physically weaker. They could no longer handle that, and therefore it stopped. But there was a time that any time a person studied Torah, like in shul, sometimes you stand up they take the Torah out, you stand up out of respect for Torah. So for them, every time they learn, they stood up. Why? Because Torah is not just wisdom, it's godly wisdom. And if we have that feeling every time we learn Torah, we'd approach it totally different. I once gave a Tanya shir in a yeshiva called Yeshiva Flatbush. And the principal there saw me teaching the class, and he said, do they teach Tanya to the way they used to teach in my days? I looked at him, he didn't look very far from a Chabad person. He said he learned in yeshiva in Hebron, I think in the 1920s. And he said, the Lubavitcher guy would come there and teach them Tanya. But he said, if you want to study Tanya, you have to put on your hat and your jacket. You can't just sit in your shirt and learn Chassidus. That's also changed. You learn shirt and a shirt. It means the feelings, people are not as sensitive as they used to be. But there used to be more sensitivity. And when you're learning Torah, this is something godly. Now the Rebbe says, but you can't think about that every second when you're learning, and you won't be able to concentrate on the academic part of it. So before you start learning, you say that to yourself, and then you dive into the academic part.
Okay, so there is a way that we need to behave when we learn Torah.
I guess in a respectful way. For example, I'm not going to eat a sandwich and at the same time be learning. I told this to the class once. I remember once seeing someone, he was learning actually Chassidus, and it was not just Chassidus, it was Samach Vov, which was one of the deepest Chassidic books. And he was sitting on a chair. He had his feet on the windowsill. The book was on his stomach. On his right side, he had a bag of popcorn. On the left side, it was a Coke, and he was learning the Bible. You know, I saw a lot of things when I was younger, but some things just stick to your head. That's not the way to learn Chassidus. And not the way to learn Torah in general, not Chassidus, even Gemara. So, you know, to learn Gemara in a respectful way. But the main thing is to realize what it is, and therefore to realize that it's precious. And in fact, that's also, I didn't mention number 31. That's why we say, what if a person feels, I don't have that feeling, should I still be learning Torah? And the answer is yes. That's number 31 on the list. When a person learns Torah, shalei l'shma, because Torah is godliness, and when you have godliness in you, eventually that'll bring you to love Torah and love Hashem and to learning for the right reasons. Okay, we'll stop here.
Careful,